Greetings, my friend. We are all interested in the future, for that is where you and I are going to spend the rest of our lives. And remember, my friend, future events such as these will affect you in the future.
And now, adventures in time and space, told in future tense.
Ultraljubičasta katastrofa.
Yes, I want to know how long are you all going to be on Earth, and if you can go back to Venus, are you going back?
Damen und Herren, Monsieur, Signore and Signori, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Ultraviolet Catastrophe, episode 21.
Episode 21. Why are we speaking in English, Goran?
Because our guest is from the outer space.
He's not from outer space.
No, but from the sunny galaxy.
No, he's not from outer
Sunny state.
The sunny state, yes.
Yes.
So let's welcome Christopher McKay, Dr. Chris McKay, as we all fondly know him. And Goran, why don't you read a little bit about,
our guest.
What does Chris do?
Well, Dr. Chris McKay is a planetary scientist at NASA Ames Research Center studying planetary atmospheres, astrobiology, and terraforming. Mr. McKay majored in physics at Florida Atlantic University, where he also studied mechanical engineering and received his Ph.D. in AstroGeophysics. Wow, it sounds great, isn't it? Astrophysics from the University of Colorado, that I forgot to mention. And then some brief overview of the honors and awards. 1981, United States Antarctic Service Medal. 1989, Urey Prize of the Division of Planetary Sciences. 2004, NASA Exceptional Leadership Medal. 2005, NASA Ames Honor Award. 2005, International Society Study of the Origins of Life. Then 2012, NASA Presidential Rank Award. 2015, Nevada Medal. 2019, National Space Grand Distinguished Service Award.
Lots of medals, but why? What is the motivation there? So, Chris, thank you again for coming here. It's been an honor to know you and to work with you on some projects. And the motivation for what do you actually do at NASA, and maybe what is exobiology? And
good question, Boris. As you just heard, my background was in physics. And from physics, I wandered into astrophysics, mostly by finding a broken telescope in the physics lab and fixing it, taking it outside and looking at Saturn. And then from astrophysics, I ended up in astrobiology and planetary science, primarily because I entered graduate school in 1976, and that was the year Viking landed on Mars. Viking was the first mission to Mars to land and search for life, and it really captivated me. The idea that here was another planet that was so similar to the Earth in many ways, and the first results of the mission seemed to suggest there was no life. And that got me thinking, why is that? What's going on? Why is there life on Earth and not on Mars? Was there ever life on Mars? And it was a rabbit hole, as people say, and I fell down that rabbit hole. What is life on other worlds? Why is there life on Earth? Is there life on Mars? Could there be life anywhere else? And I brought my background in physics and my newfound interest in biology down that rabbit hole with me, and I've been there ever since. And so my motivation really can be summed up by the question, is there life anywhere else beyond the Earth? And is that life related to us, or is it really a second genesis? So the place to look immediately, of course, is Mars.
We'll get to that. We'll get to that, Chris. That was just a great introduction, and I remember I actually still do have the National Geographic cover with the Viking landing, right. and obviously, like Carl Sagan, did a lot of work, heavy lifting there in designing those experiments on the lander, which was, like the very, very early stage. Now, since you mentioned life, I just want to bring up the difference between could life exist in a galaxy, which is something that Seth Shostak and the SETI Institute actually does look for, and your focus is more on the solar system, and perhaps right. Now that we have Kepler and James Webb and all of the other instruments out there, perhaps, like life in closer star systems, which do have planets. So your focus is actually the solar system. So
right.
Can you walk us through a little bit of, what could be there in the solar system? And maybe we can expand then on some of the topics.
But first, I want to emphasize what you said, Boris. There's at least 3 attempts to search for life. There's SETI, very far out, searching for life so far away that we can't see it, but we might be able to hear it on the radio. Then there is exoplanet.
That's why we are on the radio today. Yeah.
Exactly. The radio can.
We're going to be sending this out. So.
Yeah, and that's interesting stuff, and that's what the SETI Institute does, and Seth is a well-known member of that. A second domain that's now opening up is searching for life that we can see. Maybe we can see the effects of it on exoplanets through our big telescopes. And James Webb telescope is really opening up that possibility that we will see the effects of life on other planets in nearby stars.
Now, when you say effects of life, can you just give us 1 or 2 examples? How would we see that?
Yeah, maybe loud parties or something like that.
Yeah, maybe, but more likely, oxygen in the atmosphere is an example. The oxygen in Earth's atmosphere is produced by life, and it therefore represents a biosignature. And so if we looked and we saw an Earth-sized planet around a sunlight star, say a couple hundred light years away, and we saw oxygen in its atmosphere, that would get people thinking maybe there's life there, and that's what made the oxygen. So we would see the effects of life.
We wouldn't see the animal or the living rock, but we would see
the effects, right? So to me, that's a little bit better than just listening on the radio for them. But in our own solar system, we can not only investigate life by looking for it, but we can actually go and touch it and pick it up and examine it. And that's what interests me, and that's why I focus my work in the solar system. All of those searches are good, and we should search everywhere we can, any way we can. But I like the idea that I'm really fascinated by the idea that we can actually go to Mars, and we can dig and pick up organisms if they're there or their remains.
And we have been doing this for 20. No, exactly. Let me say. I landed in '97. I believe Sojourner landed in '97, which was the first of the rover missions of the 5 big NASA rover missions. There's one Chinese today as well. So there's one more thing probably that we forgot to mention is that we may find life, living life. But we also could find extinct. I don't know whether they will be. I mean, they will be fossils, but they wouldn't be bones, but probably more like molecules. So there's 2 domains in the solar system, I guess.
Yeah. Well, we on Mars we might actually find frozen corpses, dead bodies. Think of the giant mammoths that they're found in the ice in Siberia. That sort of thing. It's not a fossil. It's an actual organism frozen in the ice. Mars is interesting because it's so cold, it may have preserved frozen dead organisms. And it may also have organisms that are still alive.
Frozen because there is water, and water, at least for the life that we know, that's something important.
And besides Mars, so to speak, which are the prime suspects for finding life in our solar system? Like, for example, Jupiter's moons, Europa or Saturn's moon, Titan and Enceladus.
That's exactly the list. That's exactly my list. My favorite places are Mars, Enceladus, Europa, and Titan, because those are the ones I think that have the best chances. They're the ones that are worth the effort right now.
Okay,
based on what we know.
Why exactly those
Mars,
heavenly bodies?
Right. Good question. Mars, because we have evidence that it used to have lots of water. It had a history that was the most like Earth of any place else in our solar system. It's not that way now, so we would be searching for the remnants of the life or frozen remains. Europa and Enceladus are both interesting because they have massive oceans underneath the icy surface. Enceladus is particularly tantalizing because there's a vent of water coming out of that ocean into space. We can fly through and sample it. So Mars, Europa, and Enceladus are all what I would call water worlds. Worlds where if we're looking for life that lives in water like we do or is made up of water like we are. Titan is interesting in a different way. It's got a liquid, but it's not water.
It's looking for methane.
Yeah, exactly.
So
and ethane.
Methane
well.
sea.
Yeah. Methane and ethane oceans, or lakes.
Yes.
Yeah, lakes
would
be the best.
It's sort of like natural gas kind of thing, right?
Right, very cold.
Very cold. But
liquid.
it has snow, but it has rains. It has a cycle. A geological cycle. I mean, not geological because it's not
fluid cycle.
Yeah, but a fluid cycle. Yes.
And what about Venus? Venus is out of question. I recently read some articles that maybe Venus could be.
That was the phosphine result, right?
Yeah. I'm not so hot on Venus, if you excuse the pun.
But Venus is very hot.
Yeah, it is. Very hot indeed.
So you know hot about the hot Venus.
Yeah, it doesn't really satisfy the basic criteria for possibility of life. There's just no habitats where you can imagine there might be the requirements for life. Now, I could be wrong on that, and I hope I am. You know, the more life, the better. But in terms of where do I put my effort, you know, I have to vote with my feet. Where do I go? What missions do I work on? Venus isn't on my list. My list has 4 worlds: Mars, Europa, Enceladus, and Titan. And any mission to those 4 worlds, I'm on it. Venus, I'll wait and see and let others who are more optimistic pursue.
And it's not like you're on because you're fired up about that, but it's because you do have experience as a principal investigator already on, like what was the number of NASA missions? I do recall the Titan lander. I think, were you a PI on that one?
I was involved on that. I was part of the science team. But more interesting is the missions coming up. The Dragonfly mission to Titan is going to be the most interesting mission to Titan, and I'm a co-I on that mission, co-investigator on that mission too. That will, just to put this in perspective, how big the solar system is, that mission will land in 2034, as I recall, 2034.
So we 12 years from now.
Yeah. So anybody in the audience who's in high school or even middle school can look forward to working on the data from that mission when they are graduate students at university. So,
and just to explain the mission a little bit, it's like a helicopter, sort of like the little Mars one that we're like testing our feet on other planets and flying on other planets, but this is
a chopper.
It's an 8-bladed rotocraft. That's right. It's a helicopter.
And it's not sent to Ukraine or anything like that. It's actually like doing science.
Yeah, right. No bombs on it. But it's being sent to Saturn and to its largest moon, Titan. And it will land and make analyses in the soil. And then it will charge its batteries with a RTG, radioactive thermal generator. And then it will fly to another site and do the same thing. And it will search for 2 types of life that may have existed in water in Titan's past, but it will also search for life that may exist now living in the liquid methane, ethane liquid. So that's just fascinating. We are going for the first time.
Completely new thing.
Yeah, to search for something that we don't even know might exist. It just blows my mind that we could do that. I just love it. I just love the Dragonfly mission because we are going to go and search for something that may be totally alien and really different than anything in our experience. It's not just life as we know it, Jim. This is something really different.
Yes, this is. And you know, like going back to, you know, like why missions are important. I mean, look at all of the new knowledge and everything else that we learned from the rovers, the 5 of them that NASA sent up to Mars. So you were actually working at NASA, you know, like when you were younger, in a period where everything was humans and not really doing a lot of science, but let's, you know, like launch people and, you know, like do the moon missions, which were fantastic and all of that. But later on, it sort of, the science side froze a little bit, especially towards Mars for some reason. And you were part of this group at NASA, which I understand is called the NASA Underground. And you guys were just quietly working. And I'm mentioning this not only for the science and exploration perspective, but how when you're in a large organization, like, I don't know, we will have students that will go and work in ESA here, the European Space Agency, although, you know, like I see a lot of people still wearing, not still wearing, but predominantly wearing NASA T-shirts around Zagreb. So, you know, like, if the big agency goal doesn't really go along with your own interests, how do you survive that? And, you know, like, tell us a little bit about that. That's
a good point, Boris. The way I would describe it is there was a time when the search for life on Mars and the search for life beyond the Earth was not a priority. Was not. I remember a senior engineer from JPL, you know, early on asking me, give me the name of any serious scientist that think we ought to search for life beyond the Earth now, right? He was a little bit just ribbing me, but that view was widespread. But I saw the importance of it all along, and so I just kept pushing for it. I didn't make a stink. I just said, here's the logic for why Mars is interesting and why the search for life is important. Look at the history of life on Earth, compare it to the history of Mars. Look at the distribution of water and organics. We got to go search. We won't know until we search. And then, you know, remarkably, in the late 90s, it just turned around completely. And suddenly astrobiology was everybody's favorite topic, and all the missions in the solar system were tied to the search for life as the ultimate goal. And so we became flavor of the month. And that's okay. My view hasn't changed because my view is based on really a scientific assessment
first
of the
principles
of life on Earth and what we learned by the other planets. And so the shifting of the politics goes back and forth, and sometimes the wind blows in your direction and sometimes it doesn't. But it doesn't matter if you're really focused on the science. That you can just ignore that and just keep pushing in the direction you want to go and work on problems you can and write papers and make the case based on the science and avoid getting into the politics. That's one thing I like about NASA, in that in the end, the scientific and technical discussions win.
That's actually a great advice, I guess, for, you know, like people who are young now and only starting their careers doing PhDs and doing all the things necessary to do science and how to actually manage their own process. That's great. Goran, you had a question.
I have a question, some basic questions. We're talking about life here. Well, what exactly is life? You know, which boxes, so to speak, we have to be checked in order to proclaim something as someone. Well, you know, I read somewhere that there was something like 123 definitions of life so far, and one definition which seems to be favored by NASA is that life is self-sustaining chemical system capable of Darwinian evolution, or more simply, life is matter that can reproduce itself and evolve as survival dictates. Well, what is life exactly?
Well, the definition you just gave are pretty good ones, but the problem is we have not been able to put those definitions to the test. Mm-hmm. And I doubt that once we find life, we will say, oh, look, this matches our definitions perfectly. I think we'll end up in a process that's somewhat iterative. We go out and look, we find something, we say, is this life? Then there's a lot of argument and discussion. We refine our definitions, we refine our understanding based on what we see, and in the end we conclude, well, it is or isn't life. So I'm avoiding spending a lot of time trying to define what life is. Like you say, there's hundreds of definitions.
Let's collect data.
Yeah, let's get data. Science works best when it's driven by observation. So let's go out and get some data and some observations and see what we find. And it's very, very rare that we get it right before we get the data. And then, look, the universe is exactly like we thought it was going to be. Never happens. It's usually the opposite. We go there. I mean, you think of the exoplanets. Before we discovered exoplanets, there was all these theories about what exoplanets look like. And
how many
not
are
surprisingly,
there?
they look like our solar system. Nothing like that. We get the data, and they don't look anything like that. I remember an exoplanet scientist giving a talk soon after the discovery of after Kepler, and he said, well, we didn't predict exoplanets, although now that we see them, we can explain them. And that's an important insight. Science is not very good at predicting. But once it has observations, it's very good at explaining.
At inferring what's going on.
Yeah, and so I'm hoping to be able to see the day when we find evidence of life and we explain why it's life and what it's doing. And I'm not so interested in trying to predict in advance what the definition of life is or how it's going to look when we find it. And so that perspective has important implications. It means that we have to keep our eyes open, so to speak, and design our instruments in a way to be as general as we can under the assumption that we don't really know exactly what we're going to find or what we're looking for. So we have to look in as many different ways as we can. And that's why I love the Dragonfly mission, because it's looking both for water-based life and methane-based life. Look for whatever we can imagine we can look for.
You piqued my curiosity there. So I remember when Huygens landed on methane, basically water was those round rocks. I mean, water is frozen solid. But are you saying that, like once in the past, that was actually liquid water, or?
Titan may have had liquid water in the past, and it also may have liquid water in the subsurface. It may have, like Europa and Enceladus, may have oceans of water, ammonia underneath, and they may erupt onto the surface and occasionally make ice-covered lakes. So it's not impossible that Titan could have had transient water environments on the surface and long-lived water environments below surface. So that's why Dragonfly is also looking for evidence of water-based life, just like we're looking for on Mars. But on the surface now, the liquid that does the fluvial cycle is liquid methane, ethane.
Got it.
Okay, could you maybe describe to us some experiments that are specifically designed exclusively to the search for life? One fun fact, I heard that, for example, in preparing for the mission, Viking mission to Mars, while brainstorming on experiments that might detect life, one fellow suggests, why we just don't put the plate with the food in front of the lander?
It
seemed quite logical.
And it was done, right?
Yes, it's funny you say that, because that's essentially what Viking did. Mm-hmm. Viking tried to find life on Mars by offering it food. So samples.
What kind of food?
Well, basically chicken soup.
Okay.
Chicken soup. And the chicken soup was labeled with radioactive carbon-14. And then the idea was that if there was something in the soil that liked that nutrient, it would consume it and produce labeled C14 CO2. So it looked for anything that would eat nutrients and release CO2. And there's many organisms on Earth, including humans. That's how they make their living. They consume organics, combust them, and produce CO2 as a byproduct. The Viking biology experiments, all three of them, were based on the idea that you could detect life by trying to give it food and watch it grow and look at the effects of its growth. Like you do in a very simple biology experiment. You take a swab of your nostril and you swipe it on a petri dish. The agar in the petri dish is food, organisms that are on the swab grow, and they make culture, and it's a standard microbiology technique. And in the time of Viking, that was the best they could do. But I often tell people, do you have kids? Sometimes you give them food and they refuse to eat it. Well, that doesn't mean they're not alive.
Good point.
A lot of microorganisms act the same way. We now know that more than 90% of the microorganisms in the soil in your backyard won't eat any of the culturing food that microbiologists give it. So culturing is no longer, it's called culturing, this approach where you put food on it. It's just not the approach we use anymore. So we wouldn't want to do that. So the short answer to your question is no, we don't want to search for life by giving it food because we don't know what it eats, and we don't know if it'll eat even if we gave it what it wants to eat.
You actually gave a very nice segue into like a big area of what you did in the past and you're still doing, which is I guess understanding how do we recognize life, which is like what this was all about, but doing it on Earth, trying to find places on Earth where like we have something similar or something that is relatively simple that we may be able to guess. Nobody expects dinosaurs swimming in the oceans of Europe. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, and that'd be great to be proven wrong. But even dinosaurs, like coexisted actually with bacteria, which predated every complex form of life. And so, tell us a little bit about your work on Earth that is actually impacting what we do in space.
Right. The point is a good one. Searching, and it goes back to the question of food. How do we search for life? What do we actually do? And we just concluded that giving them food is not a good idea because we don't know what they want to eat or if they'll eat it even if we did give it to them. So how do we search for life? And then what Boris's question is how do we test our ideas for how to search for life? And what we do is we go to places on Earth where life is at its limit, places with the least life, the deadest places we can find on Earth. There's still life there.
Can you tell us some of them?
Well, my two favorite places are the Atacama Desert in Chile, which is the driest desert on Earth. The hyper-arid core of the Atacama is the absolute driest desert on Earth.
Like no rain for
sometimes for years and even decades.
Hundreds of years.
And to put it in perspective, it is roughly 50 times drier than Death Valley, California. So it's very, very dry. So that is one of our test sites. The other test site that we use is the high elevation valleys in Antarctica in the region called the Dry Valleys. Very dry, very cold, no liquid water, only ice and vapor. And so only snow, never rain. Those represent our test cases. And our logic is simple. If we can't find the little bits of life that are in these places, then we're not ready to go to Mars. So we test our instruments in these locations, and we test our general understanding of life at the limit of dryness and the limit of cold and dryness.
So that is interesting because you put Antarctica. So physicists are putting Antarctica now on the science map with all the neutrino observatory. I mean, the neutrino observatory, but you put it like on the exobiology, which makes sense.
Right. Yeah, the Atacama Desert, which is very easy to get to, by the way. You could fly into an international airport in Antofagasta and rent a car, and in 1 hour, well, hour and a half if you follow the speed limit, you can be in the driest place on Earth, following a reasonably well-paved road. Pull into the Antofagasta University research station and have a picnic in the driest place on Earth. It's actually quite pleasant. Dry and warm, temperate is very pleasant for human beings. It's just not a good place to grow because there's no source of water.
But
the Antarctic,
very
hard to get to. Mm-hmm. It takes a couple weeks of travel and ski-equipped planes and helicopters and so on. But those are the two places to go. the Atacama and the Antarctic Dry Valleys.
Well, regarding Atacama, I heard that some experiments they are designed for the Viking mission. When they are tested in Atacama, they didn't find any life in Atacama.
That's right. That's right. And that was also true in the Dry Valleys.
Yeah. Okay.
The Viking people, scientists, were on to the same things that we're doing. That these places, the Atacama and the Dry Valleys, were the test sites to use. And they found that there were places in the Atacama and in the Dry Valleys where there is nothing that they could detect with their instrument. But it goes back to the way they were approaching it, which is culturing with food. And we go now and do whole genome sequencing. We just pick up dirt and we just.
I was just about to say, like that was the late '60s. Like we didn't have, like genome sequencing or any of the molecular biology tools that we have today. So can you tell us maybe, like what are some of the interesting molecular biology tools that maybe, like even if not performed, like on site itself, but maybe on samples that will return to Earth, and maybe we can talk about sample return and what is that, and
Well, if I had a sample back here, the very first thing I would do, is search for DNA. Now, you may say, well, maybe there's life there and it doesn't have DNA. Yep, that's true. But DNA is such a common denominator of life on Earth that I would search for it anyway. That's the first thing I would do if I had a sample. I would go to the lab and search for DNA. If I found DNA, then that puts us in one particular direction. Let's analyze that DNA. Let's sequence that DNA. Let's compare it to sequences of DNA on Earth. Let's see how it maps. Let's take the genetic approach. And that's the way we work in the Atacama. We'll take a sample, and the first thing we'll do is sequence all the DNA and RNA and do the sequence analysis. If there was no DNA, then that option is not open. And that's very good. That's very interesting because it means that life is not a common ancestor with life on Earth. It's not DNA life like we know it. It's something different. That's cool. Then the next thing I would look for is amino acids and lipids. Those are used by life on Earth, and they're probably used by any life that lives in water because they are such useful water-based molecules to have. Lipids for membranes and protein, amino acids for building structures, proteins. And life somewhere else may not have the exact same lipids or may not have exact same amino acids, but if it's living in water, it would make a lot of sense for it to use amino acids and lipids. So we would look for that. That would be the second and third thing we would look for.
Goran.
You propose a so-called icebreaker life astrobiology mission to Mars. Can you tell us a bit about it?
Yeah. Here, our hypothesis is that a place to find life on Mars is in the ice in the polar regions, not now, but 5 million years ago, when Mars was tilted on its axis by 45 degrees. At that high tilt, the polar regions are getting a lot of sunshine in the summer. And in fact, they would get as much sunshine in the summer as the Antarctic Dry Valleys get in the summer. And we find life there. So we would go there, drill into ice, and do the same tests I just talked about. Look for lipids and look for amino acids.
So what is the status of the icebreaker mission?
We are working on it now, and we will propose it to the next discovery round. We proposed it to the last discovery round, and we got a very good score, but we didn't get selected.
Oh, okay.
So we are going now to propose to the next discovery round, building on the successful score from the last round.
It's a whole process. You don't get approved, like in the first round. It's but you have to be persistent, especially when you're a young scientist, as we hope are watching us today. Chris, tell us. So we have five. We had 5 rovers. 2 of them are still operational. And one of them is not in Jezero crater, but in Jezero crater, which is named by, it means lake in the local languages here.
Oh.
And so we pronounce it Jezero.
But it's called Jezero on purpose, you know.
Yes. No,
Yes,
absolutely.
yes.
Yeah, it was named by a crater, but not by a crater, but by a lake in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Yeah. So can you walk us through, like some of the interesting results? I mean, there's a lot of science that is coming out of these two rovers. Like, what piqued your interest? What sort of do you find interesting among, like the whole bunch of data that was downloaded from Mars in this case?
Yeah. Well, it's good news and bad news. The good news is our hypothesis that these sites, Gale Crater and Jezero Crater, were ancient lakes, fluvial habitats suitable for life, has been confirmed. These were good places to swim around billions of years ago. It's just amazing to now have such good confirmation that Mars had these fairly large Earth-like environments, water environments. That's the good news. The bad news is there's not obvious evidence of life.
No fish.
You don't see, no dead fish. If you went to a dried lake on Earth, you'd find lots of literal and figurative dead fish,
and even fish sleeping under the sand.
No dead fish, no swimming trunks whatsoever. The bad news is that we see, Curiosity, which has been operating now for 10 years and has reached a fairly high level of sophistication in their analysis, do detect organic material. First clear detection of organic material on Mars. But it's very, very small, very low levels, and nothing that one could call a biomarker. Nothing that we could say, this organic molecule came from a living system. So the good news is that the habitats were there. The environments were there. The bad news is that the remains of any life have not yet been found. And the current thinking is the reason we haven't found anything is we've only been able to scratch the surface, so to speak. And the surface has been destroyed. Evidence of life billions of years ago has been destroyed by cosmic rays. And that to find evidence of life at these sites in situ, we may have to go deep, deep down, maybe 10 meters down. The other good news is that Perseverance will collect samples and bring them back to Earth eventually. And there on Earth, we can bring much, much more sophisticated analytical instruments to bear on these samples. And so maybe even in these very irradiated remnants, we might find convincing evidence of life that we couldn't do on a rover because you're limited to kind
pieces
of
the puzzle.
Yeah. So the equatorial exploration has been good news and a little bit frustrating, but there's a long range option here with the sample return that could really be very important.
Well, let's be clear, just on the case of Mars, we are not just searching for the past life, but we are hoping maybe they will find, recent life of Mars.
Yeah, or both. Both. Yeah, we don't know. So I think, again, as I said earlier, we should look every way we can, every place we can. Finding life is just such an interesting question that we should go everywhere and do everything we can. And so I would say we would go to the equatorial regions on Mars and search for ancient life. We would go to the polar regions on Mars and search for recent life. And if we found any subsurface aquifers or water flowing, we'd go there too. So we just have to. We don't know where we're going to find things, so we got to look everywhere.
And we are doing one more thing, which you didn't mention yet, but it's equally important, is that all of these things that fly to Mars, we actually clean them very well on Earth. We have giant dishwashing machines where we put the rovers before they go into space, because what we don't want to find...
contaminate. Yeah.
Yes, we don't want to find life that actually came piggybacking on one of the missions. Right. So can you maybe expand?
But can we put together such a sterile mission? Is it even possible?
Well, maybe Chris will tell us.
Okay. They're not really sterile. NASA uses that word generally incorrectly. Sterile means zero life. And when you go to a hospital, they will take instruments out of a foil packet, and it is sterile. There's nothing alive in that. NASA doesn't really do sterilization. They do cleaning, very good cleaning. And it's the same kind of thing we do in the field. When we're going out to collect a sample, we don't want to bring garbage from our homes or from our bodies. We don't want that in the sample. So we put on gloves, and we do what we need to do to collect the sample in a way that it won't be contaminated. It's just every microbiologist and every environmental scientist on Earth knows about this. And applying it to a rover that's launching on a rocket and flying to Mars is hard. As Boris indicated, it requires establishing procedures to get that kind of cleanliness. And because exactly for the same reason, we don't want to do an analysis for life and find that there's life, but it's just life that came from the fingerprints of somebody who was working on the spacecraft, right? That's just like when I go to the Atacama and take a sample and bring it back for DNA analysis. I don't want to find my DNA. I'm not interested.
And we know that bacteria can survive in space for months or even a couple of years. So
inside a spacecraft, they can survive for a long, long time. So cleanliness is necessary, and it's not just specific to space exploration. It's necessary in medical at a level that's much more rigorous than what we do, and it's necessary in our work in the Antarctic and the Atacama, and it's even necessary for routine environmental analysis. You always want to collect a sample that represents what you're collecting and not you.
Okay, then hypothetically, if we find a life on Mars, what do we do then? Should we put the Mars in sort of quarantine? Or
we put the David Bowie record on the record player, right?
Yeah. that is the most important question. If we succeed, then what?
Then we won't send a human mission to the Mars.
Well, it depends on your answer to the question. Mm-hmm. I think we all could agree that that's the question. It's interesting, though, that question isn't really discussed very much.
That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, okay. I agree. It's an important question to ask. I love to ask it. And interestingly, when I give talks to kids, that's one of the questions they always ask. If you find life on Mars, what are you going to do? And I tell them, that's a good question. And
maybe
NASA,
then we have to invoke the Prime Directive from the Star Trek. Yeah.
Maybe, but maybe we do something. So I would say there's three possible answers.
Three options.
Three options. One is ignore it and just disregard it. Just move in. Who cares? Stomp them out. Pretty callous.
Do the Earth all over again.
Yeah, right. Option two is quarantining. That's your prime directive. Don't interfere. Don't go there. Don't stop. Don't send humans. Don't let it come to Earth. Basically, just say, you stay there, we'll stay here, and have a good day. Just ignore it. Isolate it, ignore it, quarantine it. Maybe study it with telescopes, but don't send humans and don't bring it back to Earth by any means. Option three is go study it. Send humans in a way that doesn't contaminate it, study it, learn how it lives, and help it do better. I like that option. I call it the I'm from the government, I'm here to help option.
That's a very optimistic option. I like that one.
Yeah, it is. But, in the long run, I tell kids, you say, imagine, 500 years from now, we meet some aliens, and they say, hey, well, what have you been doing? And we say, well, we found some neighbors on the nearby planet and we squashed them. Or we say, we found some neighbors on the nearby planet and we just didn't do anything. They're not doing very well, but we didn't help them because we didn't want to take a risk. Or we say, hey, we found some neighbors next door. They're on a planet that was dying. We stepped in and helped them. We revived their planet and they're now doing great. And isn't that cool? And they'd say, hey, gold star for you, Earthlings. You did something useful. So as you could tell by the way I'm describing the options, I prefer that last option. That if we find life, we should help.
That's a good one. That's a good one. But then there's, the SpaceX's and the Elon Musk's and the Mars Society and everybody else who let's go, put the flag. Let's move humans. Let's make actually a second home.
I think it's the position of Mr. Zubrin, isn't it?
Yes.
Let's,
Let's colonize. Let's expand.
Let's go.
That's how we
nothing
thrive.
Stop us. Let nothing stop us. But I think I'm all for human exploration and establishing a human base on Mars. But if there is life on Mars, especially if the life there is different from Earth life, then I think what we do should be crafted around that life and how do we support it and help it. That our ultimate goal should not be mindless expansion of humans, but should be enhancing and supporting the diversity and richness of life everywhere, including Earth. So if there's no life on Mars, if we find no evidence of life on Mars, I'm all for spreading life from Earth there. Go life, go. And if there is life on Mars, I'm for helping life, help life. Go see what's there, study it. We are smart enough to become gardeners on the planetary scale. And we could bring Mars. If there's life on Mars, it's not doing very well. Unlike life on Earth. You look at Earth and it's just covered with life.
That's really a conundrum that we opened here. What to do with that? But we have not found life on Mars yet, so let's move.
Until then, it's hypothetical question.
Let's move on to...
let's fly beyond our solar system.
The oceans. No, the oceans.
Oceans. Okay, I would like maybe...
We'll get to
okay, we'll
oceans.
get there.
Yeah,
okay.
absolutely.
So what is your question?
We're on our way
Boris?
out. We just passed Mars.
Okay.
Yes.
We made a right at the asteroid belt, and now we're coming to Europa and
Enceladus,
Yeah, those are very interesting. In a different way, I would contend. Mars is interesting because it had such an Earth-like history, and it could have such an Earth-like future. So Mars always has a special place, at least in my interest, because it's so much like us. And what is more interesting than us?
Right, and it's so close to us, and all of that.
So it's got a past and it's got a future.
But
Europa,
the moons have a lot more water, and they have energy as well. And as we know, we do have different forms of life on Earth. Around the energy that is underneath the oceans, the black smokers and all that.
Geothermal vents and so on, okay?
It may be that Europa and Enceladus are actually more habitable than Mars, and more likely places to find life than Mars. And so I'm very interested in them, but they don't have that parallel to Earth in terms of its history and its future, but they're still very interesting.
Right.
So I'm dedicated to the search for life.
It's like the Monterey Seaquarium, but to the third exponent. Those missions would be much harder than. We learned in the '60s how to land on a different stellar body, like the moon landings of the Apollo missions. With Mars rovers, we learned how to actually conduct missions which are 20 minutes away, time of flight of light. So we can't really drive it from, like NASA Ames in Mountain View. We actually need the rovers to, do all of the autonomy and everything else by themselves. It seems to me that the ocean missions are going to be, an order of magnitude at least more complex.
It certainly will be harder and longer. Even just flying out to the outer solar system takes a long time.
Sure, but we know how to do that. But going through ice, collecting data, communicating back through that ice back, to Earth. Do you have any vision of how that might work? Something that might inspire, a current ESA student or NASA student or.
Well, the Europa and Enceladus really present quite different opportunities. Let's start with Enceladus because it's the easiest one. It has a plume coming out into space.
Oh yeah, we can sniff the plume.
We can fly through and grab a sample, and we could analyze it there or bring it back to Earth. So there's a clear path forward there. It's still hard. Targeting the plume, getting there, getting a sample, keeping it fresh, or analyzing it. These are not easy things. Europa, though, is another level of difficulty because as you're implying, there we may have to drill through some fairly thick ice.
How thick?
Could be kilometers thick.
Kilometers, okay.
Right. Now, I work on ice-covered lakes, and where I complain that I have to drill through sometimes 5 meters of ice. And it's hard. Cutting through cold ice.
With all the earthly tools that we have here, and then you have to go through.
With people there on helping us, you know.
But then again, you know, like if you have energy, ice melts, so you don't really have to drill. Right. You could, just melt
it.
You could melt your way down. Right.
We do that in some of our lakes where we melt a big hole for diving. We use a melter, and that's because we have an enormous energy supply. We have a barrel full of gasoline that we use to run a generator and a hot water heater. Okay, now that kind of energy is orders of magnitude larger than the energy supply on a spacecraft.
Right.
So drilling through very cold ice with a spacecraft, or melting through very cold ice in a spacecraft, it's just can't be done with current approaches. So it's a very hard problem. Mm-hmm. It's not theoretically impossible. It's just we don't have the technology yet to get through thick ice.
Well, we just have to put a big iron on the surface of that lake, you know.
And then we have to have a long extension cord to plug the iron in. Right.
The largest extension cord in the universe.
Yeah. Right. So the problem is an energy one, getting through. And then, of course, the thickness of the ice and communication, it's a challenge. I don't see
communication could be dealt with. I mean, you leave, like an antenna on the surface, trail, a wire or a fiber optic thing or something. And then when you hit the water, then maybe you plug in, your new router there, and then you can, swim around or dive around,
but the Enceladus is then much easier. You just have to take a shower.
You have to take a shower in Enceladus. That is definitely
just take a shower and fly back. It's very simple.
Right. Yeah. And that's why we're working on Enceladus now, more so than Europa, because it is simpler. It is simpler. It's further, but it's simpler. But we're on a trip.
I mean, it is simpler, but we don't have a chemistry lab either. We would like those samples actually in a proper chemistry lab, which is a different thing.
I'd like to bring them back. But that won't be the next mission. The first mission to Enceladus will probably fly through the plume and analyze them there. Mm-hmm. And if they're interesting, then there might be a mission to fly to the plume, grab a sample, keep it cold, bring it back to Earth.
What kind of instruments are we talking about when you say we've just flied through the plume?
Well, primarily gas chromatograph and mass spectrometry.
Okay. Yeah.
Like sense. The one that's on Rosetta, like the one that's on ExoMars, like the one that's on Curiosity.
Essentially artificial noses for people who their heads are blown up at what is a gas chromatography. It's like a nose.
Yeah, it's the kind of instrument that they would use if you call them up and said, "Hey, I think there's some pollutants in my backyard. Tell me what it is." That's what
something smells bad. They bring a gas chromatograph and they tell you exactly this smells bad, or maybe this smells like life.
Yeah. On Earth, life is common, but what they'd be probably searching for is chemical compounds of industrial waste to find out who did it. But hey, we were flying from Mars to the ocean worlds, but the next stop out is Titan. And that's a different world altogether. So Mars is one class of objects of interest. Europa and Enceladus, I think, are together in another class.
And then Titan
is in a class of its own.
Absolutely.
And that's because the possibility of life in the liquid on the surface that's not water. Wow, that would be so cool. If any of these came true, That's the one I would be the most.
All right, I'm going to sign on. I have my name on Mars because I sent my name to NASA, and so hopefully, the Dragonfly mission will also have that little cool thing.
Oh, I wonder if maybe.
Yeah,
they will.
we should do
know.
that because I want my name not just on Mars but on Titan as well, and then my grandkids will.
Right.
I think Gordon wants to go even beyond the solar system and
maybe
speculate into
he
speculation.
He would like maybe to stand a little bit on Titan, or we are going beyond?
I think you can speculate because we're getting close to. Chris has another meeting coming up.
Okay, yes, we have to be patient. Okay, so let's fly beyond our solar system. As any candidates beyond, and which and where are they?
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough. Right now, we can fly with some difficulty to the planets in our solar system. But the nearest star, say Alpha Centauri or Proxima Centauri, is way, way, way farther. It's 4 light years away. And we just cannot imagine doing these kind of missions. Yeah. I think we are so isolated from the exoplanets that we discover. Oh, and Proxima Centauri does have exoplanets.
Yeah.
But we are so far from them, and our technology is so primitive that for a long time, we're only going to be able to look at these worlds.
Okay, by looking at these worlds with some instruments, there is no possibility that we could search for life.
No, yes, we could. I think we could. I don't see why we couldn't search for life. But what we could do is analyze its DNA or analyze its biochemistry or determine if it's related to us. Is it on our tree of life, or is it really alien?
And even tell if it's going to be conclusive, because even if you find, oxygen in an atmosphere, you can't really, without having a sample of that life, conclusively tell. Well, the universe can be really weird. And
it's going to be hard to be conclusive. You're right. It's going to be hard to get really.
Maybe we can narrow down the path to some sort of conclusiveness, but I don't. It's going to be very hard to, unless we see people life waving at us with lasers or radio waves or anything like that. But
with the T-shirts, Ultraviolet Catastrophe, our favorite.
We're getting into SETI territory. Maybe we'll get Seth Shostak, one of them shows, to join us. But you know what? You have a meeting, so this is a hard stop for you. Tell us, to get a glimpse of a daily life of a scientist at NASA Ames, so what is your next meeting about? Is it one of the boring administrative meetings? What do scientists do when they actually end up at NASA? For our younger audience and people who want to actually study.
I would say I have 3 kinds of days. So I do, typical day, I do one of 3 things. Most days, I'm sitting at a computer, analyzing data, writing papers. That's a common feature of science in any field. Analyze your data and write up your results. It isn't science until it's published. That's an important lesson for all future scientists. You've got to have those days or you're not a scientist. But because I'm at NASA, I have 2 other types of days. One is going out to places like the Atacama in the Antarctic and collecting samples and doing analysis and preparing for future missions. And that is so different than sitting at my desk and writing papers, and I love it. I love being out there.
Field days.
Field work, yeah. And when I have field days, they're usually 2 months in a row, so it's quite a trip. Then the third type of day, which is fewer but very amazing, is working directly on a mission. Sending commands or analyzing data as it comes down, or in discussions over what the hell did we just find and what does it mean? And what is this? What are we going to do next? Planning, doing the analysis of missions, or planning future missions. Like let's talk about icebreaker. Where should we land it? We're having that discussion right now. Let's land it in a place where humans might go. And those kind of days, that's it's that third type of day is why I'm at NASA. I could be doing field work anywhere, and I could be doing data science work, analysis, and paper writing anywhere. But at NASA, that's the best place to talk about missions.
The best place to work in the universe, as far as I'm concerned. I remember my visit to JPL and the Deep Space, what is it called? The Deep Space room.
Deep Space Nine room.
Not Deep Space.
Yeah.
Go ahead, and I'm sure you have, one last question for our guests before we have to sign off.
Some trivia for the happy end. Check this out, Boris. Would you believe me if I say that I know exactly where our guest was on May 14, 1973?
I have no idea where Chris was on May 14, 1973.
I don't either.
I learned he was watching the last Saturn V launch.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and you were very impressed.
Yes, you're right. You're right. Thank you for bringing back that memory. Skylab, me and Phil Zimmerman and Cecile Penland, two other grad students, we were undergraduates, drove up to Kennedy Space Center. We had got a local newspaper, a little shopping newspaper to give us press credentials so we could get into the press site. And you're right there next door to Walter Cronkite and CBS, watching the Saturn V rocket. And, I knew what to expect, but it wasn't what I expected. It was just so amazing to feel the ground shake and to see the engines burning, and to realize what was going on, that this was something that human beings had done, that we had built a machine that could leave the Earth and go to space and explore other worlds. And, I knew that as somebody involved in astrophysics. I knew it at an intellectual level, but watching the launch sort of put it at a gut level, put it in my stomach in a gut level that I really hadn't had before. It really is an amazing experience. And so I encourage people, whenever they can, go watch launches. I went to watch the shuttle launch, the nighttime shuttle launch, and eventually I'll go watch a Falcon 9 and the SLS launch. Watching a launch, watching something, a machine that humans made, take off from the Earth and go into space, makes the sense of space exploration really, makes it a feeling, not just a thought.
I think that you just made the high note of this broadcast. So, Chris, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your friendship over the years, and thank you extremely much for showing up today on our little ultraviolet catastrophe, which was not a catastrophe, but it's our science moniker. And
Great.
And maybe we'll see you, sometimes in the future again. And good luck and great results in all of your science in the future. Thank you again.
Thanks, Boris. It's a pleasure talking to you both, and thank you for the interesting questions and discussion. Bye.
Thank you very much again.
And this was yet another edition of Ultraviolet Catastrophe. This time in English. Maybe we'll subtitle it.
My friend, you have seen this incident based on sworn testimony. Can you prove that it didn't happen? Perhaps on your way home, someone will pass you in the dark, and you will never know it, for they will be from outer space. Many scientists believe that another world is watching us this moment. We once laughed at the horseless carriage, the airplane, the telephone, the electric light, vitamins, radio, and even television. And now some of us laugh at outer space.
Ultraljubičasta katastrofa. Ova emisija sufinansirana je sredstvima Fonda za poticanje pluralizma i raznovrsnosti elektroničkih medija.